What is good, everybody? This is Our Future Podcast. And today we're talking about two AI companies, one in the grocery industry and the other in the medical records space. It's going to be really exciting. These companies are both built by exceptional founders in their mid to late 20s. And I'm joined, as always, by my co host, Simran Sandhu. He and I are exited founders at the ripe old ages of our early 20s. And we get to do this podcast where we study the most successful young people building companies. We analyze their strategies, their business models, and some of the cool stories in their journey to help you guys think about how to go out and build your own companies, your own products, and your own world-changing ventures. So I'm going to start with the first story, but Simi probably has something to say about being in this, New York-inspired Indiana office setting.
Hey, New York, Indianapolis, all I'm hearing is AI everywhere. Okay, doesn't matter where you are. It feels like every company we cover at this point has some kind of AI element into it. So why don't you rip the Band-Aid off and tell us what's happening in the grocery space?
Is pulling that Allen Iverson. It's going coast to coast. But today we have three co-founders in their mid to late 20s. We have Henry Michaelson, Spencer Price, and Gabriel Nipote. And they're the co-founders of a company called Halla. Halla, you can kind of think of it like the For You page for the grocery industry. It's an AI platform that allows grocery stores to tailor and personalize the experience of people who are shopping on their digital websites, right? So ordering groceries online. These guys have a really interesting story. So the kind of idea started with Henry at UC Berkeley, and they were trying to build a food delivery app that kind of personalized recommendations. So instead of having to scroll through a bunch of storefronts on DoorDash or Uber Eats, it'll kind of like tell you what you're feeling. You know, it'll kind of give you the recommendations, whether it's dietary preferences, calorie count, whatever. But they kind of ran into a challenge because billions of dollars are being deployed by DoorDash on marketing. So it didn't make sense to start a food delivery app. So they killed the app, but they actually brought out the technology that was powering it. They thought they could license this B2B, and they were absolutely right. So this was around 2017, 2018, and digital grocery ordering was growing really fast, right? Definitely quick, but not even close to how quick it grew during COVID. So these guys rode a wave early, and they've worked with over 3,000 digital storefronts for grocery stores. And that includes some of the top 10 grocers, some of the biggest companies in America. They can't name them, but I'm assuming players like Kroger, Aldi, right, who all have their own, online ordering storefronts. And Halla's technology is powering your experience, whether it's search, whether it's recommendation, or whether it's, kind of substitution products, which are very important in the delivery market, right? When a product isn't in stock, what does that shopper actually take to your place when they delivered the order? So they ended up raising, I think it was like around $10 million in venture. And they were recently acquired by Wynshop, which is a massive company that is really the full suite verticalized digital store kind of service company for a lot of these grocery chains. So they sold the business, and they built this super powerful AI layer, right? That's increased retention on these grocery ordering sites. It's grown sales, and it's really helped these these very traditional businesses operate in this new world. Another really interesting thing about their business, a kind of defining stat that made them interested in making the pivot from the delivery app to providing tech as a service. And that was that Amazon generates a third of all product sales through recommendation algorithms, right? So people also bought, you might also like, and kind of just products that are kind of put on the page that you might buy. And I think that's super fascinating because in a world where we're kind of, looking at, these content sites, we're trying to pick what we want. Being able to put the right product in front of somebody at the right time is incredibly value in increasing marginal transaction size for these companies. So they really, fell into a powerful mechanic in a growing industry. So I think it's a really cool story, and kudos to them on the acquisition.
Yeah, it's definitely a cool story. I think there's a lot of variables here. They got the timing right. They had the foresight to spin out like the more successful, higher leverage opportunity out of this. It almost sounds a little bit Slack like. Slack tried to do the gaming thing first, didn't work out, so they were like, what's the next best alternative?
Yeah.
B2B enterprise chat. So, I'm hearing a lot of that in this story too. It was like, we're gonna do this cool buzzy thing for consumers and help them with, food, but screw that, we're going straight to the grocers. But
Yeah.
smart decision. They ended up getting the company bought because of it. So
Well, dude, maybe every founder should start a consumer app and then realize they can just spin out some B2B tech from it. Like maybe that's just where the next big B2B software company will come from is by accident. And maybe it's actually the people who don't go into B2B software who end up winning in B2B software. So I hope that's me and you, given we have a background in consumer. Maybe we can figure out some kind of tech play that's actually scalable. You know what I'm saying?
no, for sure. In some ways, I mean, consumer is just so much harder, right? So, there's like this running joke that if you can successfully build a consumer company, you can very easily go build, a B2B company.
Yeah, yeah. I think both have their strengths and weaknesses, obviously. But could you imagine how hard it is to sell to these grocery chains, right? Like actually reaching people who are decision makers in these, grocery orgs. They don't think about technology. They don't give a shit about it, right? But they're kind of like, aware of it. One really interesting tidbit from these guys, like a scrappy growth tactic they used. They set the I think this is true. This is what they say. We set the record for contact downloads during the trial period of Zoom Info. So they essentially just did everything in their power in a scrappy way to get as many kind of inroads into the industry as possible. And I was like, damn, like, that's
Contact
scrappy as
downloads
hell.
meaning like meaning like prospecting and stuff. Like they were
Yeah.
just
So they
saying
had,
hit
I
up
don't know,
every
maybe,
single grocer. Yeah.
yes, they had maybe a week with Zoom Info and they just like used it, to its full force, right? These guys literally were milking the free trial, just like, a lot of us in sales do, because we use these tools and then you maybe not realize they're as worth the money because they're expensive. Like Zoom Info's Rocket Reach and Sales Nav, these add up.
This is interesting because this is one of those kind of businesses that I would expect like a very tenured person in this industry to go start, right? It is someone who has been in the trenches for decades or 2 decades, has really seen how this industry has played out, and then realized like, hey, there's a lot of value in this like personalized, experience. Let's help, these grocers get more conversions, help them with the conversion layer more broadly speaking. And so, this is one of those things that like is interesting because it's a few young guys who started it. And I think,
Yeah.
we talk a lot about how it's so valuable to bootstrap a company, you get so much more control. But for once, I'm going to take the other side of this and say that like in an industry like this where you have maybe very entrenched players, they're not so open to using new software, raising money can be a huge thing only because of the signal that it provides. I
Dude,
think that
absolutely.
I think, if you can go in and say, hey, I raised 10 million from these very reputable firms, and you can get backing from big advisors and big strategic angels and stuff, like that is how you open the door when like the door has traditionally been shut to, new ideas and new innovation and new software companies.
Yeah, so create external noise in the market. It's a great lesson
Yeah.
right there. These guys assembled a world-class advisory board. They said people in marketing, retail tech, grocery, CPG, right? So they had some people who had some
Yeah.
stature backing them, right? To kind of assuage concerns about, these three kids trying to run amok in this old established industry. And they also realized how valuable press was. Now, in the food industry, there's a few major press outlets that really drive a lot of attention. Like if you're in grocery, you're probably reading like Retail Dive, or there's one like, I think it's a Grocery Dive or something, Grocery Insights. And they really position themselves as like the company for like grocery AI. So they got in a bunch of news publications and outlets. And I think that was really important for them to be able to like have conversations because they, raised money and they had kind of like some press around them that would make it easier, right, to get into an industry like this where, if you do have something good, going to need external sources to say it is.
Yeah, for sure. And they sold to a strategic, I believe, right? So
Yeah.
this was kind of someone who was a bigger player. Were they a customer or a competitor? Do you know which one of the two it was?
They sold to a customer. So
Okay.
Wynshop is you could think of Wynshop as white labeling all these storefronts to grocery stores. So no grocery chain had the internal capabilities to build like a website, build the digital ordering infrastructure, right? Do kind of their own white labeled Instacart, right? So all these stores have their own way for customers to order online. And Wynshop provides that. So end to end, right? Top to bottom. And Halla was this layer inside of Wynshop's offering, right? So I think they probably found it didn't make much sense to sell directly to these grocery stores. It made a lot more sense just to partner and get in deep with a channel partner, right? And that is what ended up in an acquisition. They worked with them for 4 years. And I think it just made a lot more sense to integrate with that firm because, again, all the tech these companies were creating were with this one business. So being an off the shelf product that they would integrate with this other provider just I don't think made as much sense. So really, I think this entire business was destined to lie within the channel partner for something.
No,
this
seriously. I
big.
mean, I love the idea of selling or working with a strategic, and I'll tell you a few reasons why. One is I think a strategic will pay a much higher multiple relative to other, private equity companies, maybe other opportunistic buyers, like someone who is already again entrenched in the space, and is somewhere along the value chain, or you guys are somewhere adjacent to them. They're just going to be willing to pay way more. I hear this happen in the consumer space all the time. Like consumer software is like a great example of this, where they don't have many buyers. There's really only one or two buyers for those kind of businesses, but because they've made themselves so integral to that process, they get, that is a company that should realistically sell for 10 million, but they'll sell for close to 20-25 mil. So I love the idea again of being bought by a strategic. The other valuable point is, depending on who the incumbent is in the space, I've also heard of friends who played it very strategically and almost opportunistically. And what they will do is they will go to the big incumbent in the space, figure out like who leads their product team, or, whoever is the high up executive there, and be like, just very honestly, hey, I'm looking to solve this problem. I'm assuming you guys are going to face this. Like, what do you think? Is this something you're going to attack? And what you will most likely hear is that for the big companies, if it's not $1 billion bet for them, they're not going to do it. And so literally I've heard of conversations where, friends of mine have gone to the big incumbent and, kind of presented what they're trying to do. And they've said exactly that. They're like, listen, I think what you're doing makes a lot of sense. It's not a big enough bet for us to go build internally. So go build it and we'll buy it off you. And like that has been counsel that I've heard all the time. And I'm like, what a better way to get validation than literally like a potential acquirer telling you they will buy it if you build it.
Yeah, dude, that's kind of a strategy, right? Is like also for young entrepreneurs, like getting into some of these incubators, right? So a lot of these maybe more established players will have some kind of incubator or venture program, accelerator program. We talked about that guy, Griffin Spolansky, who was doing the snack bar company, and he was in Mondelez's accelerator, right?
Mondelez.
So what
That's
better
right.
way to get exposed to a potential acquirer than actually taking money from them, right? I mean, we tried this at Our Future, right, to raise money from a strategic. And obviously, as many people know who listen, they probably know our story decently well. We didn't raise, but that still opened the door to having these conversations with companies like Morning Brew, who ended up acquiring us, right?
There is one caveat to what you're saying. Okay, so I think
Yeah.
accelerators could be valuable. But what I've been told as of recent that has been like an eye opener for me, I always thought, hey, you're going to go start a B2B software company or go do something big, maybe it's in sales tech, whatever. Who is the best person you should work with is maybe the venture team for those companies. Like, why would you not go raise from like Salesforce Venture? They're like corporate venture arm. And I've been told that they are the least useful investors of all time. The corporate venture arms are a very strong signal, but they don't actually do like really help you in
So
any material way.
they're just signaling
They're
because
just
you'll see
signaling.
like
And
these fintechs and stuff
yeah,
raising from like American Express Ventures or MasterCard Ventures, and it seems super legit. It's like,
it is
shit,
legit, but
they're
they
in
don't actually
finance and they
open
got
many
one of
doors
them.
for you. Yeah, they don't actually open many
Mm.
doors for you. And I was like, wow, like this is something that, a lot of people can fall in this trap because like it feels so intuitive. It's like, why would they not help you? It's literally like the big player in the space. But yeah, the corporate venture arms, you're like something you got to be very careful of. I think if you're going into it with like, this is just purely a signal, then that's fine. But like, again, if you're in a regulated space and you're like, oh, they're going to open the doors for me, realize that's probably not going to be the case.
Yeah, dude, I think that makes a ton of sense too. It's also like having a strategic also might be it actually might be a good thing they aren't very involved investors, because like you don't want them telling you how to approach an industry that they're an incumbent in and they, you want to disrupt, right? Like you don't even want that kind of pressure because investors are your bosses, right? So maybe it just comes down to having like
Well,
a
it's
balanced cap
slightly
table.
different. It's slightly different, right? So the corporate venture team is different from the corporate dev team, right? So the corporate
Mm,
venture team is usually like an external company or an affiliate of the big entity, but they don't really operate like, they're not in cahoots, right? Like Google Ventures does not work with Google in that way, right? Like they are
yeah.
aligned, but not really. So when I would say like work with a strategic or whatever, like find someone who is like, leading that product organization internally at these companies, or you're speaking with someone on the corp dev team. That is very different from working with, again, the corporate venture team, whose entire goal is just to invest in emerging companies.
Got it. Okay, that's an interesting note for anybody who's thinking about raising. I think like yeah, a balanced cap table, right? Like have investors who can be really involved and have like deep expertise and ability to make connections. Have flashier investors that'll get you covered on our future, and then have those corporate arms. But I just want to talk about something back to Hala that's I think is super interesting, right? Personalization is getting more and more like dystopian, right? Like what I just was listening to one of the Spencer, the CEO of Hall, I was listening to him speak, and he's like, one day everybody's going to have their own grocery store, right? Like every little item they see laid out on this digital storefront is going to be tailored to just them. It's just really fascinating, right? Spencer talked about an acquisition Spotify made a few years back that powers its algorithm, right? So um, I think this layer of personalization and like algorithm licensing tech is actually very acquisitive, because if you build that particular layer, a company kind of like owning you outright, like in the case of Spotify, maybe they're working with other music platforms, that generates like so much enterprise value for them just to hold on to this particular closed source algorithm, right?
Yeah, I think personalization is something that every industry and every category will see as an opportunity. So I think that's pretty much like a blanket thing. I think you could focus on finding a more personalized solution in any category and find some opportunity or some level of success in. Dude, it's wild, man. The world is gonna look so different, even in 12 months from now, let alone 5 years. So it's gonna be crazy.
I mean, that's what our future podcast is about, dude. Like, we're gonna have a credit card from our employer. We're gonna be storing our kids' umbilical cords for a future illness or disease. We're gonna, it's we're looking at our own grocery store. This is a taste of what's coming, and that's why these young people are pushing hard to like make new futures possible.
Totally. Well, let's go ahead and move on to our next story, also filled with young guys trying to make something happen. So, we have these three guys who started this healthcare company in their early 20s. Their names are Akilesh Bapu, Matthew Ko, and Kairu Zhang. And they're building a company called DeepScribe, which is an AI powered medical transcription platform. They've raised over $35 million from the founders of Scale AI and Figma. And, it has an interesting backstory. So, Akilesh's, dad was a physician, and he noticed how stressed and how much time he was spending just writing notes from conversations he was having with his patients. And so what he ended up realizing was that back in the day, most of these physicians were taking these notes by hand, but there was a healthcare act that passed in 2009 which mandated these healthcare providers to transition from paper-based records to electronic systems. And the ironic thing was that instead of streamlining their workflow, it actually ended up disrupting it. And so these guys noticed an opportunity, which was there were already a lot of documentation tools that existed in the marketplace, but no one was focusing on summary, which is where, most of the time was being spent. And so they created this tool, and at this point, they've saved doctors millions of minutes. And it's a very accurate tool. Apparently, in 2023, they set the industry standard for accuracy because they outperformed GPT-4 by over 32% when it came to medical documentation. The space itself is expected to grow to almost $5 billion in 2027. So it is growing quick, but it is getting pretty competitive. Some of their biggest competitors are companies like NVIDIA, Google, and Amazon. So we'll see how it plays out. But, I think it's an interesting idea and definitely solves a problem.
Yeah, it's a a company with a massive potential, right, to generate a ton of value in the healthcare sector. The most interesting thing to me when I was doing research on this business was that of the 3.5 trillion the U.S. spends on healthcare per year, 700 billion of that goes to physicians. So it's actually just the cost of the human doctor. Now, this company has identified a way to increase the productivity and efficiency of physicians, right? So I looked at an article and it was saying Akilesh wanted physicians to see more like 50, 60 patients a day when right now they're seeing only 20 to 30. So really it's a massive productivity driver and one that can help increase, get more people access to care, as well as, make these medical practices more profitable, right? It's already a tough industry. There's a lot of waste. So companies that can clean that up are going to make billions. It's also an interesting signal. The medical transcription market is only, I think it was worth $1 billion in 2019. It's going to be 5 billion. It was 5 billion in the next
Yeah,
few
it grew
years,
like
right? That's
270% in like 7 years. It's crazy.
yes, yes. But what's more interesting than that to me, like the signal, is that Nvidia, Amazon, all these AI, with their AI LLM and models, they're focusing a lot of attention on medical transcription, right? $5 billion market. All the world's biggest companies are trying to build a product in the space, and I think that that's just because, once this technology can be truly accurate, it's going to be worth so much more than 5 billion, right? Like, you know, removing physician costs, $3.5 billion. That's, I don't know, that's a huge chunk, right? So I think a lot of these companies are thinking about how do we either empower physicians with AI, replace physicians with AI, right? It's a massively hot sector to look at. So I think DeepScribe has nailed that.
Yeah. I think a few notes come to mind. One is that documentation is like one of those things, it's almost bittersweet, right? You can't live with it, but you can't live without it either. And so,
Yeah.
you know, it's like this is so common in many industries where it's like, yeah, you need to document this, work, or you need to document out these notes just so, you can have team alignment. In this case, it's, legally required to do so, but it ends up taking away such important time from actually doing the work. And so, there's this like funny joke again in like the sales world, which is like, most AEs or like SDRs aren't actually out there selling. They're selling maybe a few hours a day. Most of the time they're just updating their CRMs, which is why you see so many sales tech tools out there. But yeah, I think, this is definitely very value add. The other thing that, I would think about here, which is, these big companies have found their way into such intimate parts of our lives, right? They're in our phones, they're in our houses, whatever. But it seems like healthcare is just that one nut they haven't been able to crack. And I think, from the standpoint of being able to capture some of that healthcare data, or, kind of get that wedge in the door, by, maybe it's just something as simple as just like recording notes between a doctor and that patient. I feel like this goes back to the personalization thing. I think if they are able to get their hands on some of that data and info, there's going to be so many second and third order effects of that like are going to play into some of their other products. So I can only imagine what
Yeah.
like a personalized or integrated healthcare version of like Apple or Amazon looks like, in our daily lives.
Yeah. I mean, what you said about the struggles for these big ass businesses to penetrate is very true. JP Morgan, Amazon, and Berkshire Hathaway's shared kind of health initiative or venture that failed. It didn't really go anywhere. And speaking of that electronic record law, I believe that was the one Bill Gurley referenced when he was at the All In Summit and was talking about regulatory capture. He was talking about how that particular deal actually just catapulted Epic to new levels of revenue and domination in the market because they were the incumbent and they wanted this regulation because they were doing electronic health records. And, when I did that story, if you don't know who Judy Faulkner is, she's the second or third richest woman in America, controls 70% of all health records for Americans. And that's probably what DeepScribe is being entered into, is the Epic Health system. These big cats like Amazon, Microsoft, they all want to get a chunk, but they haven't really been able to. But I want to go back to what you said about second and third order effects. I think it's super accurate. If you can nail the first part of any process, you're going to be able to deal with the second, third, and fourth, right? The good analogy is like HubSpot, right? Here's all your customer information. Now let's email them, let's call them, right? Let's do all these secondary and tertiary actions upon that, initial core data set. DeepScribe's got this info. Could they move to diagnosis after, once they've got all the patient notes? Because all you need is the input from the patient, and then the output, the treatment plan, right? So there's a lot of room to run. But I would also say, like, we can't forget, like, that AI is really in its earliest phases. A Wall Street Journal article did come out on DeepScribe that said they're using a team of like 50 people, some of which don't quite have the right training, but they're editing a lot of these notes. It's not accurate. I mean, speech to text is still, OpenAI only just rolled that out for ChatGPT. It's still just not that good. So, it's all very early, and a lot of improvement needs to happen. But, if you can have, this interaction between human and AI, where the human's kind of cleaning up the AI's mistakes, and that just makes the AI smarter over time, is really like how you start attacking it now and get to a place in the future where it's flawless.
I totally agree, but I'm just surprised they were able to get this to like actually be used by physicians. Like, I just figured there would be so many little like privacy issues and privacy concerns about like letting an AI based company just like record conversations between, a doctor and a patient that is like considered very, very sensitive. I don't know how they did it. I don't really know what their wedge could have been. I don't even know if that's something where, again, just having the right advisor or like having the right investor could get your foot in the door there. I don't know what magic they worked.
Well, I think one advantage to their strategy is they targeted SMBs. So this is small oncology clinics, small private, maybe one or
That's
two
fair.
physician clinics, right? And they're able to adapt this technology much more seamlessly. But they are in some big health systems. But I think going after players like that is when you really get to that, regulatory thick, slow mud to move forward. I want to mention another interesting thing from this company's story. And it was around, so they had spent 6 to 12 months developing DeepScribe, and they said they were actually about to quit. So they went to like 5 or 10 doctors. They said, first of all, it's just impossible to get customer feedback from a doctor. They're too freaking busy. They're losing hundreds of dollars for every hour they spend with you, if not thousands, because they're doctors. And they said, they pretty much just said it's just not usable. Like, it's not going to help. Like, I'm not going to trust this thing to work with me. I'm not saving time. And Akilesh said the best advice I received was that we shouldn't be too sensitive early on to what customers think about the product. I feel like that goes kind of that pushes against some of like this YC mentality of like, listen to your customers. They knew this was a big problem and they executed. So they then talked to another 10 doctors. They didn't want to work with it. And then the 21st doctor said they would absolutely love using the product.
Dude, that's the thing, right? Like, I think this is challenging because, I would say domain expertise is more important in some ways than customer feedback. I think customer feedback generally is more important, again, if you don't have any industry
If you don't
expertise,
have
you
it,
don't
yeah,
understand the domain. It's like Akilesh's dad was a physician. Like, he can see the struggles that he is going
for
through,
sure.
and that's enough to say there is a problem here and it needs to be solved. You know, is it convenient for them to implement this? Probably not, which is why doctors were probably like, they shook their head and they didn't want it in the beginning. But that's only until it reaches some critical mass where it does become the de facto industry standard. And now, you are wasting money and wasting time by not implementing that solution. And so that's kind of the thing, or the nuance, that I think YC feedback doesn't incorporate, is like, if you understand the space, like you truly understand the dynamics, how it's previously worked, where it's headed, then, customer feedback is probably somewhat overrated.
I've heard of YC founders struggling. Like, they've gone into YC and then they're like, no, don't do that. Build a consumer product instead. It's like, oh, you want to build like AI for sales teams? Nah, like build it for like pet owners. And it's like, I feel like that can kind of push you in the wrong direction. And they're also like, oh, you have to like be customer validated. Um, Again, in some instances it makes sense, but again, the more and more I'm studying these founders and the more I think about my future entrepreneurship journey, it's really just like, act on gut feeling, find a big problem that's really messy and that you can create value in, and go and freaking execute on it. Being stuck in the doom loop of having conversations with people about whether they'd buy or use your product, or if they think there's a problem, I just think can be very difficult to navigate emotionally, mentally. and strategically for a founder. And I've
Yeah,
said
I
that
also
before.
think I also think, it comes back to how you do your customer discovery early on for whatever product it is you're building. Are you trying to bait them into, giving you the answer you want to hear, or are you actually like trying to understand the root cause or the root problem that they face? And I think
Yeah.
that as young founders, maybe people who haven't done it before, they're seeking out validation. They're not actually trying to understand the root problem. They're just like, hey, I have this idea. Tell me what I want to hear. So I'm gonna just keep
Yeah.
asking you, or I'm just gonna rephrase it in a way that is like, now that you mention it, like, yeah, I guess it is a problem. And that's not so helpful and that's not so valuable. What is more valuable is just saying like, just asking like very inquisitive questions, but not mentioning your product or like the idea whatsoever. Like if you're going into customer discovery, you shouldn't even mention that you're working on something new in most cases. Like it should be very much like, hey, curious, like where do you spend most of your time right now? Oh, interesting. Are you spending a lot of money on that? Okay. I
Hmm.
mean, have you looked at alternative solutions? That's a big thing in itself, right? Like, are they looking at alternative solutions right now to solve the problem? And in most cases, people aren't. And so, if they're not actively spending money and they're not actively spending time finding an alternative solution to what is the industry incumbent, then there's probably not a problem to solve in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's a great framework if you don't know what the hell the actual problem is. You're trying to figure one out. But maybe the big takeaway, build in what you know, baby. Just go out and find the problem you understand and then go and bring the people on you need to get it done and go and get a win.
It's so funny too because I saw this tweet from this guy named Emery Wells, who is the founder of Frame.
Frame,
Um,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
sold that company to Adobe for $1 billion, and he was talking about like this framework that he created on selling a company for hundreds of millions. And I'm probably gonna butcher it, but the premise was like, go work in the space for 6 to 12 months, heads down, like take a job in the space, or like try to be someone's assistant or whatever it looks like, and then build the solution from the ground up. So if you're working for a specific company, you notice a specific problem, try to get them as a customer so you can leave with PMF. And until you reach that like point where someone is willing to buy it, right, especially the company that you're working for or whatever, don't scale it out, or like don't leave your, don't take it further. And I like that approach and that idea. It's like you really have to. First off, it's like, if you're not willing to work at a certain company or a certain industry for 6 to 12 months just to test out the idea, and see if it's a real problem, you're probably not going to be sustainable in the long term. But who knows, like what opportunities that presents. Like I think if you're actually in the domain, you'll go in with this working hypothesis, and what you'll notice is a potentially even a much bigger opportunity than what you were initially thinking or expecting. So that's kind of
That's such a good
the
piece of feedback.
yeah, I think that's always just kind of a helpful framework. So I did like the tweet. Will that lead to you selling a company for 9 figures? That's probably TBD, but
Yeah, like
it's a good starting point.
that's honestly like a pretty big bet to like go and spend 6 to 12 months at a company in the space you want to target. I mean, most people are cycling between business ideas every hour. So yeah, that's conviction, man. That's very a lot of conviction. If you want to be a plumber, spend a lot of time in the
Well,
bathroom.
dude, it's like, listen, if you're raising money, now you've taken a path that is, hey, I'm going to go build this company 5, 7, 10 years, whatever. Right.
Yeah.
It's like, if you think 6 months is just too long, then like, that's probably like concerning in itself. Right. Like 6 months
Save
may
yourself.
sound long, but 6 months isn't so long in the scheme of 10 years.
Exactly. I mean, save yourself the pivot. All right. We're saving you guys the pivot. Okay. I want to
And
see
leave with
a
the
line. I
customer.
don't want to see a zigzag. All right. Just a straight line, conviction, beginning, middle, and end. That's how we wrap the episode, baby.
All right. And that wraps up another episode of Our Future Podcast. Please subscribe, give us a like wherever you listen to this. As always, we got our info in the show notes, and we will catch you again next week with another episode of Our Future Podcast. Stay frosty.
Stay frosty. Peace.